Islamophobia is socially acceptable again right here in this clip.
Not going to cry a river when people who have genocide that's baked into their laws are getting genocided. They're terrible people.
What the f? Ain't no way he's talking about Palestinians, right? Asmongold is an organization owner, and one of the people that owns the organization is literally Muslim. How are you this far removed from like all aspects of real life existence? Like have a conversation with Tips, man, please.
It's not even a question. It's crazy that people don't see it that way. They'd be doing the same thing. And how much did they kill? As many as they can. They're not able to kill as many people as Israel because they don't have as many bombs and as many weapons. But if they did, they'd be doing the same thing.
Oh my God, I hate this argument so much, bro. This is crazy. What is this? This is the full clip?
Want to consider a genocide as a systematic killing of a group of people. They have genocide built into Sharia law.
Bro, oh my God, bro, oh my God, oh my.
Right now. So no, I'm not going to cry a river when people who have genocide that's baked into their laws are getting genocided. They're terrible people. It's not even a question. It's crazy that people don't see it that way. They'd be doing the same thing.
Asmongold, come on, dude.
And how much did they kill? As many as they can. They're not able to kill as many people as Israel because they don't.
It's so funny because like this argument literally is basically, you're laughing, but thousands more now believe this and everyone just lets them do it. I'm laughing because his analysis right here is the liberal analysis. When you scratch the surface of like the average American over a certain age and why they are so blind to the obvious dynamic, the obvious inequalities, the obvious inhumanity of Israel's operations, they literally agree with this. They also think this. You only arrive at this conclusion after years and years and years of social conditioning that justify the war on terror, America's war on terror, and the unironic justifications for this war on terror required the dehumanization of Arabs and Muslims and every single person that lives in that part of the region. Because if you were to look at the situation, okay, and recognize that humans are being blown apart so that America can secure oil fields in Iraq, you would go crazy. So you have to either, on the one hand, omit key details, but also every single time you cover the atrocities, have to make it seem like they are, you know, worthy targets or collateral damage that is permissible. Why is it permissible? Because they're not really human beings. Now, I thought we as a society had moved past that point. You know, Joe Biden pulled out of Afghanistan. I thought I was wrong. I mean, I thought that like maybe America was turning a page on Islamophobia. I was wrong. I mean, it was wish casting. Okay. Obviously those underlying resentments never really go away. And it takes so much more time to actually rewrite and make people understand that like, no, these people are human beings. What you're saying is it gets worse.
Don't have as many bombs and as many weapons. But if they did, they'd be doing the same thing. That's it. Just takes enough. That's right. These people are not your allies. They are not the same as us. They come from an inferior culture.
Asmongold, your co-owner of your organization, you are calling a person from an inferior culture. What are you doing? Log off the internet, Stop reading fucking Reddit and go talk to some real humans, please. I know you could talk to Wake, okay? Talk to Wake. Talk to Tips. Talk to a human, please.
That is horrible. It kills people for their identity, and it is directly antithetical to everything Western values stand for, and it is an inferior culture in all ways. It is that simple.
Bro, this is straight up one-to-one what Nazis said about Jewish people, what like the most right-wing approach to this conversation. This is insane. This is absolutely nutty. Americans, man, Americans. This kind of attitude is like American exceptionalism through and through. This kind of attitude, American exceptionalism, literally is the same thing. You're just removing American exceptionalist sentiment that is baked into American society, Western superiority. You're just taking the thing that shelters it and the thing that makes it like the norm. When you remove the outside patina, the skeleton remains. This is the skeleton. This is the bare bones, okay? This is the bare bones of the argument. This is the bare bones of the argument that like America is the best country on earth. When you remove the outside stuff that makes it, I guess, seemingly more appropriate for liberal consumption, okay, in an otherwise liberal society, this is what you arrive at. I think he popped off on this, not thinking that like this would be, there would be a lot of repercussions for this. I don't think he understands like how unimaginably fucked up this statement is. It's not even necessarily a country. You're no longer justifying like military action against the country. You are now basically saying like an entire culture is inferior to Western culture. The build up to the clip doesn't just make it worse.
And you know what else is disgusting? That people in the West that enjoy more privileges and freedom than anywhere else in the world romanticize their behavior or their lifestyle as anything other than barbaric.
This is what people think you say about Israel. I know. Like, if you were to say this about Judaism, understandably and rightfully, you would get banned, and you should get banned. Like, if I were to ever say this about, like, oh, Jewish culture is this way, I would literally be Adolf Hitler, okay?
With that at all. I know plenty of Muslims that respect gays. Well, I'm not talking about Muslims. I'm talking about people in Palestine. The truth is that that's what they do.
Dude, come on, dude. What? Palestinian culture as a whole? Dude, this is your brain on Reddit. This is your brain on Reddit. If you don't interact with normal people, if you don't talk to people on a daily basis, and the only way that you're getting information from, your only outlet to the outside world is just simply Reddit, you arrive at this conclusion. It's like literally a vector of radicalization against Muslims, Islamophobia, and also specifically Palestinians. It's also additionally ironic when we talk about LGBTQ support, because this community his community hates gay people in representation and shit in like video games. That's the other part of this that I don't understand. It's like, oh, Western culture is so superior. We love the gays, except I fucking throw a fit every time I see them in my video games.
That's what they do over there. So no, I'm not going to support a group of people that would be the ones doing the genociding if they had the power to do it. I'm sorry to say, I'm not.
The idea that if Palestinians had the capacity to do Israel shit, they would do Israel shit back to Israel is a silly one, because if Palestinians had a nation state with sovereignty and nuclear weapons, then Israel wouldn't be able to do anything to the Palestinians, and therefore there is no world in which they would do the exact same thing back to Israel. You do not know that. All of the Palestinian resistance is within the framework of anti-colonial resistance. That's what it is. Okay? There are methods that you do not agree with. There are methods that I don't agree with. Okay? But ultimately, in the grand scheme of things, who is responsible for the larger harm? Who is radicalizing people into taking action into their own hands? it is obviously going to be the colonial state. It is going to be the larger state. It's going to be the playground bully with a bigger stick. I DM'd him. I said, look, I could talk to you off stream or on stream if you want. It's fine. Anyway, let me finish this off, and then I'm going to move on.
I don't have any sympathy for them. I'm sure at some degree there are people that are caught in the crossfire. This is sad, but at the end of the day, this is an immoral, evil culture. I truly believe that.
I think there's nothing funnier than saying that the Palestinians live in an immoral culture, an inferior culture, while you live in the United States of America and you are advocating for the death and destruction and the genocide of the Palestinian people. I think that is the most immoral thing you can say. That's it. I think there is nothing more immoral than taking a pro-genocide position and try to justify it by saying, "Oh, well, the people that they're slaughtering are immoral and barbaric and inferior." But ultimately, I care more about how many Americans also exhibit this tendency and genuinely believe this shit. Like saying they're inferior, saying they're evil to justify the death and destruction that befalls them is so horrifying. Why don't you talk to him, bro? I want to. I reached out. We'll see. He might be too far gone on this, especially considering that his business partner and co-owner of the organization that he's a part of is literally Muslim. Like, that's what's so crazy about this. He has people that are in his immediate life that he could talk to, not just Muslim people, but like someone like Wake, for example. Okay, Asmongold wants to talk, he said. Hello?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. All right. Asmon.
Okay. Yes.
In the interest of fairness, I want you to explain what you said that I saw in limited clips earlier today, I think.
Okay, so basically, I find it to be really problematic that people put like a lot of virtue signaling, and I think it is virtue signaling, for people that are supportive for like trans rights and LGBT rights when they support countries that kill people and prosecute them for being LGBT. I think that's a huge problem, and I don't think you can have both of those things.
So when you were saying like Palestinians exhibit an inferior culture that's barbaric, you were simply talking about the hypocrisy? Is that what it is?
Yeah, pretty much. I do. And somebody in my chat said that you said that I thought Christian theocracy was better.
No, I didn't say that.
Oh, what a fucking surprise. Okay. Well, here's the thing, right? Yeah, go ahead.
I want you to like fully explain, because I want to understand everything that you mean beyond the hypocrisy, because like the hypocrisy version, or the hypocrisy in and of itself, is one thing that we can address. It's a super simple concept.
Well,
but
how
I
do
think
you
there's
feel about that?
there's always a broader point beyond hypocrisy, because online hypocrisy in and of itself, or even the invocation of hypocrisy or perceived hypocrisy, is seemingly a more damaging thing than like actual material harm, right? Oh, this person is hypocritical, and that's like a very common fucking thing. I'm sure you experience it on a regular basis as well. It doesn't really matter.
Most hypocrisy, I think, is derived from a misunderstanding that is often deliberate. I see it oftentimes with you. You've seen it with me. Everybody has it happen. It's extremely commmen on the internet.
It's the Andrew Tate phenomenon, right? Where people don't give a fuck about like what Andrew Tate may have done or may not have done, or all the shit that he has definitely done, right? And care more about like, you know, perceived hypocrisy. Usually they care more about that than anything else. So I don't really,
I think there's a Norm Macdonald clip about that. It was very good.
Yeah, I don't necessarily care about hypocrisy that much, but in terms of the hypocrisy of a matter, I can explain it to you.
Sure.
Number one, so in terms of LGBTQ acceptance, right? Trans acceptance, queer acceptance, you find that to be, in the United States of America, in the wealthiest nation on earth, one of the most prosperous nations on the planet, to be to a certain degree, like a fancy thing to advocate for, right?
I don't think that you have to be rich to advocate for LGBT acceptance.
No, that's not what I'm saying.
Okay, what are you saying? Sorry.
No. What I'm simply saying is that LGBTQ representation in video games is oftentimes considered to be something that is like unnecessary or something that is
You're
considered
talking
to
about
be
like in games?
in games, in facets
Uh,
of culture, in facets of media.
yeah, sometimes it happens. It feels like it's inauthentic. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, in turn, wait, is there a positive example of LGBTQ representation that you can think of in mainstream media in recent years?
Sure.
Just so
Yeah.
I understand what the dynamic
So
is there.
did you play Final Fantasy 16?
I did not.
Oh my god. So they had a character in Final Fantasy 16, Final Fantasy 16. His name was Dion. And he was like the prince of an area. He was like the, like person who could like channel Bahamut, right? And he was gay, and it was part of the story. And they actually blocked sale for that game in some places in the Middle East because Square Enix didn't want to censor the game for that reason. And
But
I respected them a lot for that.
But that was wait, they refused to block the game? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, yeah, Square Enix did not do that.
And that was a good representation of like gay or trans.
Yeah, I think so. I really do.
Okay.
I think that whenever you create a character, that the character's personality, sometimes it feels like when characters are added into stories, especially if they have like an LGBT like lean to them, they can be turned into being like a one-dimensional like I guess identification of that person. And it's like they make like an overt effort to talk about that and discuss it. And I feel like in a lot of times it can come off as patronizing or talking down to the audience.
Okay.
It feels very inauthentic to me.
Okay, so
Yeah.
there are instances where there's like gay representation, trans representation that's like ham-fisted and just simply added on as not a necessary vehicle for narrative development, but instead simply for identity points, right?
Sure.
To do diversity. Okay, so not to get too lost in the sauce, we can get back to this part of the conversation in a second. But my point was that like that level of LGBTQ representation, it's for diversity. It's for marketing purposes. Usually it's just like sometimes it could be shitty narrative devices, but ultimately it doesn't really matter. But a lot of people still get mad at it, right? A lot of people in the Western world still get mad at it. And for me in particular, there is a hierarchy of needs for and that all human beings respond to, all human beings exist under.
Is this like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or is this like something else?
Maslow's hierarchy of needs is appropriate, but like there's a higher standard because the Maslow's hierarchy of needs usually is under the confines of like at least a developed country, where a developed country that is not constantly being bombarded or victims of like colonial occupation. My point is that Palestinians are not inherently anti-gay or anti-trans or anything like that. There are gay Palestinians, there are trans Palestinians, both living in Gaza, in historic Palestine, and also certainly outside of Gaza.
Well, is it against the law?
The problem is there is no time or space or opportunity for them to engage in queer liberation, let alone, advocate for more representation in their artworks, for example, when they're too busy being bombed and destroyed and killed and ethnically displaced for 76 years under an apartheid regime that is a settler colonial occupation.
Okay. Real quick. You don't think that I support Israel, do you?
I don't, but I think that... Good. No, I don't think you support Israel, but I think you saying that like Palestinians are immoral or evil or have an evil, antiquated culture or are barbaric is not only ahistorical. What's up?
I do think that.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think you're wrong.
I don't know, man. Like, how can you be in support of a culture that tells people that they can't be who they want to be? Like, I mean, really, I mean, if I was advocating for what the laws were there, I would get banned for hate speech. How's that acceptable?
Yeah. I think you are misunderstanding what their culture is, what the Palestinian culture is, and you're also not setting the standard under the material conditions in which they exist.
I don't
Like,
think that you can do that. So there are
like
a
for
number of other
example,
countries.
for
Okay,
example,
well, okay, let me go after this.
okay, no, you go ahead. But I will give you more historically appropriate points in a
Sure.
second.
So basically, the reason why I don't like what they do is because it's based off of a religious theocracy. And so you can look at other religious theocracies in other countries that aren't being bombed. And the one commonality that they have is that they all suppress people's identity and they express their freedom of expression. And I think that any culture and any type of government that is derivative of a religion is fundamentally inferior. I think this is true with any book. It's true with Judaism. It's true with Christianity. It's true with Islam. It's true with Hinduism. I think it's
Mm-hmm.
true with anything. And I find it to be very problematic that we're using these books as a guideline for like how to make laws when these books actively encourage killing people for different types of identities. And obviously, like, I understand that there's like a huge spectrum of people that are part of any culture. There's people that are way more progressive, people that are way less progressive. But what I see is that I see countries that have laws that haven't been bombed, right? You look at like Saudi Arabia or like Dubai. A lot of these other countries still have the same types of expressions or same type of restrictions on the expression for LGBT. And
Mm-hmm.
I find that to be problematic and inferior. And I think that I want to make sure that this is very clear because, like, I don't want you to think that this is something that's like oh, the brown people over there are wrong. I would say the exact same thing for us, like the church, like Christianity. Like if you look at, for example, like Salem witch trials, it's disgusting. It's horrible. So all I'm saying is that I think that there is a standard that's being applied, and I don't really understand how that's defensible at all. I don't like, and that's what doesn't make sense to me. Is
It's
that
not.
like okay,
It's
well go ahead.
not.
Yeah, go ahead.
But here is the problem.
Okay.
It's not defensible, but I think most people, including like the
Yeah.
gay Palestinians or queer Palestinians or queer Lebanese people,
Sure. Anything.
understand that there is no room for advocating for civil liberties in your own domestic policies when you are escaping bombing
So
campaigns.
I see your point,
So
but do you
this
see
is
my
the
point
reason.
that
This is the
Sorry,
reason
go ahead.
why so many of these countries,
Mhm.
whether it be Iran, whether it be Afghanistan, whether it be Egypt, or many of these places that were far more liberal from Western standards, from the Western understanding of like social liberalism, multiple decades ago, before Western intervention, are no longer as socially liberal as they once were.
You're talking
Because
about like the 1917 Iran thing, basically?
not 1917, but yes,
Or it's
circa
1979,
1950.
excuse me. Yes,
Yes.
sorry.
And when you look at the history of these countries, and not to say that like I don't personally think that Saudi Arabia deserves to be annihilated for having a religious theocracy. I don't personally think Israel deserves to be annihilated for operating within like liberal confines, but still maintaining a religious theocracy that is baked into now their constitution.
Do you
Israel.
think that I support that?
No, I don't think you support that either.
Okay.
But oh wait, well, in terms of the Palestinians, I think the quote was that inferior cultures deserve to be wiped out.
Oh, I don't know about that. I feel like anytime that you're killing people based off of anything like that, I don't think that Israel or America or anybody has the right to come in and tell Palestine how to live and for them like what they're supposed to do. Right? I'm not trying to tell them what to do, but if you want me to accept their culture as being equivalent to ours, I won't do that.
Okay.
And I do think that it's worse.
Okay, but culture, you understand that culture changes throughout time, and it is directly a consequence of like how people or what people are experiencing. In the United
Well,
States
I
of
think that
America,
we're evidence of that. We're evidence of that because like we're
yes.
much farther along.
So
Yeah, I
so
think
do
a lot
you
of places
think
in the West aren't.
like I don't think you would agree that bombing places makes them more tolerant to.
Absolutely not.
Yeah. Okay. And I don't think that
Absolutely
you.
not.
I don't think that you think that like nuking America, for example, circa 2013 when gay marriage was.
We're not going to bomb the gay into them. I understand that.
Okay.
You're totally right.
Okay. So
Yeah.
in terms of some of your statements,
Yeah.
like not only I think you're wrong on the history of queer culture in Arab countries, in Muslim nations in general. I'll give you one example. The Ottoman Empire actually decriminalized homosexuality in the Tanzimat era. I think it was like 18th century. And before then, it was not even like a problem. It was never an issue. Far before Western nations ever actually decriminalized or made it legal to be gay. And this is oftentimes a not really mentioned aspect of the Muslim world or Muslim culture or the Arab history or the region's history at all. Most people don't know this, and it's like genuinely shocking to them. You might maybe even be shocked to find out that the Ottoman Empire, where Palestine was seen as a safe haven for Jews as they were escaping the Spanish Inquisition, for example, and many other pogroms that Jewish people experienced in, especially in Western and Eastern Europe. The Ottoman Empire in the MENA region, all the way that spans to Morocco, was seen as a safe haven and safe harbor for Jews, where they were allowed to coexist in far better conditions under Islamic rule, technically, that was far more tolerant.
I would go even farther than you are. I think that back then it wasn't just the fact that they were accepting of gay. I think that they were way more scientifically oriented. They were way more focused on learning and mathematics. I think that's evidently true. I don't think anybody would say the Ottoman Empire was shitty or anything like that. I think they were very progressive for their time. It's not even a question.
So
I totally agree with you.
But things have changed in the region since then.
They sure have.
So what do you think is the difference there? Like, what do you think has happened in the hundreds of years that have passed, that have gone by, or especially in the last 100 years? Why has the attitude overall in terms of governance changed so dynamically and so dramatically?
I think there's probably a bunch of different reasons for it, right? I mean, it's not like one reason, but I don't think that are we trying to imply that it's like American imperialism and interventionism that's caused this to happen? Is that kind of like
absolutely.
where you're going with
this? No,
this?
I am saying that.
Yeah.
America not only directly armed and radicalized fundamentalists in the region, including but not limited to Afghanistan, for example, with the Mujahideen, because they were seen as like a fighting force that they could use against the communist adjacent Afghan government or the USSR inevitably when the USSR did invade. But also beyond that, the most nationalistic or the most militant fundamentalists were perceived in Iran, for example, as the true liberators that were not willing to fight against the Western-backed Shah regime, the Western-backed monarchy in Iran. So that's the reason why a lot of people, whether they agreed with it or not, ultimately on the social front doesn't really matter. They were like, these guys are going to protect us. These guys are actually fighting back against this ruthless rule of the Shah that was, falsely torturing people on a regular basis.
Okay, so
that's
if your argument is that, well, how do you reconcile that with the fact that there are other countries like Saudi Arabia, for example, that don't have that history but still have the same laws?
Oh, that's a great example. Saudi Arabia is allowed to exist like that because they have a valuable resource that they are gladly and willingly coordinating with the Western powers on, in terms of OPEC plus. They have oil.
Doesn't that?
So did Iran, but Iranian oil was refined by British Petroleum, Mossadegh at the time. It was a social democrat, very progressive for the time as well, wanted to nationalize their own extraction industries. And this was seen as a massive slight and it caused massive harm to the profit margins of British Petroleum and the American intelligence and Western intelligence cooperated to overthrow Mossadegh very openly and very clearly. They implemented the Shah regime. He was brutal. He was a brutal autocrat. He was a monarch. People hated him. And at the end of the day, it was the Islamic Revolution and the fundamentalist forces that were the most successful in terms of fighting back against the Shah. That's the reason why they overtook the country and have been dominating the nation ever since. There are plenty of gay and trans people. By the way, Iran is actually weirdly very pro-trans, but I'm sure that you probably didn't know that. They're very homophobic, but they are very pro-trans. A lot of cultures are actually very pro-trans, way more than the United States of America, maybe to a fault at times, like Iran when they do forcible gender.
I mean, you look at like Native American culture, I think it's extremely popular. Norse culture, I mean, you could say the same thing about Loki, right? It's like the idea of being trans is like super, super, super old, like Shiva, right? Another good example. So I think that's true.
There's a concept of third gender in India, Pakistan, and many other places as well. So but that's besides the point. So what I'm trying to say is we cannot exist outside of the material condition that we are subjected to. If you are living under a ruthless, corrupt autocratic rule, and there's a group of people that say, I'm going to fight back against this ruthless autocratic rule that is like Western power backed, then people will be on board with that. They're going to be like, oh, this is great. I love this revolution. I'm on board.
Okay, so I can go even farther than that. I totally understand why groups like ISIS happen. Like if you look at people from ISIS, these are people that are like 20 years old. They've lived their entire life being occupied by a foreign power. I think that we're doing a horrible thing.
And Iran, though, like I hope you understand that, right? And just like there's a difference between ISIS and Hamas and all these other I'm just
giving you an example. Giving you an example of like. So I think extremist groups are created. So you got a lot of heat. You got a lot of hate. One of your most popular, biggest hits was that America deserved 9/11. Remember that?
Yes.
Bad day. Bad day. But what you meant to say is that American interventionism inadvertently caused this to happen. Am I
directly,
right?
Not even inadvertently. Is a concept that historians call blowback.
I totally agree with you about that. I completely agree with you. I think that you're right. I defended that. Yeah. So my perspective is that I don't think that we can blame, like, I don't see the logic that all of these other countries that are like, from the West, right, that are like much more progressive are somehow intervening and making this, like, these other countries in the Middle East hate gay people and like want to kill gay people. And I don't see how, like,
wait, you don't agree with that? You're saying
no, I don't. I don't really see how they're congruent.
So I don't. Why do you think that? So why do you think that historically they didn't hate gay people, but now they do? Like, don't you? You recognize that like culture changes. You said that you understand that like the Ottoman Empire was more progressive in comparison to its European counterparts in terms of like the way that they view gay people, even or homosexuality in general.
I think that we can come to the agreement, and like we can talk about historically all you want, right? I think that in some cases, like, that's true. In a lot of cases, like the way that this is perceived around the world, like Romans looked at it differently, Greeks looked at it differently, everybody's looked at it differently. But I'm talking about what's happening today. And if I'm looking at those cultures today, those are cultures that are oppressing people based off of their identity. And at a certain point,
right now, the Palestinians don't have any structural governance to be able to do that regardless. So there is no like gay oppression happening in Gaza, because the only oppression that's happening in Gaza is that Israel's lighting them on fire with regular frequency.
And we're paying for it.
Yes. So, in terms of like Islamist fundamentalism, right?
Yeah.
In terms of Islamist fundamentalism, or the way that like you perceive Palestinians as viewing gay people. Yeah. There has never been an opportunity for for Palestinian people to engage in queer liberation, because in the hierarchy of needs, the number one need for them is to stop Israel from killing them, is to stop Israel from dominating them since 1948. And even before then as well. But after Israel was formed in 1948, that has been the game for the most part. They have never had an opportunity to even think about queer liberation. If your house is on fire, you're not going to be spending a whole lot of time thinking about the color of your curtains, right? And that's what this is. There's a much larger problem at hand. And this is precisely the reason why a lot of people actually, never fully comprehend this. But a lot of leftists in the Western world do understand that intersectionality. And regardless of like the perceived queer phobia from Palestinians and Palestinian governance, they still, of course, offer solidarity. I said this earlier, and I think it's a take bear repeating. I'm in favor of Medicare for all and universal social safety nets in the United States of America unconditionally. I do not believe in refusing to offer, for example, any sort of health care to a person because they're a Nazi even, right? That's an extreme case. I think that they deserve health care.
I agree with you, and I would even go farther than that. I think that if somebody's an illegal immigrant, I don't think that we should ever I think it's disgusting to tell a doctor or tell a healthcare provider to let somebody die or to let them bleed out or something like that just because of that. I completely agree with you. I had to pay my taxes recently. I'm sure you're probably about in the same place. It was 7 figures. And so I have no problem with that.
I live in California. It's pretty significant.
You got a bet. Yeah.
But I don't care.
Good.
I don't mind that.
I don't either. I used to be paying for people used to pay for my food stamps. Now I'm paying for somebody else's. And if they raised my taxes to pay for Medicare for all, I would be happy and I would vote for that.
So if you understand that, right? So you recognize that. Would you say that like a religious enclave in Alabama, for example, deserves to be wiped out for their understanding of like gay people? Like a white religious enclave in Alabama?
Absolutely not. I don't think that they deserve to be wiped out, but I would not advocate for them. I would not look at that group and say, this is a group of people that I support.
So you can understand where the confusion comes from when you
and I can see that. That's why I wanted to. Yeah, sure. Right. Sure. And that's why I wanted to talk to you about it. Right. Because I think that you and we had a conversation about this before. And I can very much easily empathize with Palestinians. Of course I can. But I don't think that it's entirely true that Palestine, didn't Palestine support Hitler?
No.
Pretty sure they did.
No.
The mayor of Palestine supported Hitler.
What you're talking about is the British colonial British colonial occupation put forward a leader. Oftentimes in colonies, when you engage in like colonial actions, like and British Mandate Palestine was obviously a colony of the English, they will appoint a person into a position of power that is more acceptable to British needs and desires in the region to dominate the people. History is riddled with examples such as this one. The Palestinian Grand Mufti was a singular person who went and linked up with Adolf Hitler and thought that he could coordinate with Adolf Hitler in terms of like ridding Palestine of the Jews. Having said that, however, 11,000
and that sounds pretty bad.
It does. When you realize that one, there were also Jewish militias, early Zionist militias that also sought out Adolf Hitler's help and tried to coordinate with Adolf Hitler. You understand that this has no bearing on an entire people and what their actual attitudes were. Not only that, but also 11,000 Palestinians actually fought alongside the Allied forces against Adolf Hitler. So Palestinians, by far greater numbers, actually fought against Adolf Hitler than the one British occupation guy that actually linked up with Adolf Hitler. It's actually a common historic Holocaust revisionist talking point that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu once famously utilized as well, where he falsely claimed that Adolf Hitler did not want to kill the Jews until he talked to the Palestinian Grand Mufti, who gave him the idea of killing the Jews and doing the final solution. This was such a gross historical revisionist talking point that obviously the entirety of Israeli society actually criticized Benjamin Netanyahu for saying such a ridiculous...
But he did want to get rid of the Jews, though, right?
Yeah, but it's a singular person that has no bearing on real Palestinian existence, especially when much larger numbers of Palestinians fought alongside the Allied forces, right?
I think that it definitely does matter if a figurehead of a country is supporting Hitler.
It's not a figurehead of a country, though. It's the figurehead. It's an appointed person
and
that has no bearing. And for example,
don't you feel like it's a bit unfair for you to attribute every instance of bigotry and bad behavior to being the West's fault?
No, I think I have a very realistic. I have a very realistic and materialist analysis of these sorts of things, where I think that people don't have time to fight for gay liberation when, like I said, they're too busy trying to literally rebuild their homes after it's bombed, especially by a force that, you know, doesn't have like automatic heat-seeking missiles that avoid gay people. You know what I mean? They're killing gay people and trans people in Gaza every fucking day. Like, there is no... Like, gay liberation is not a real conversation here. It's just a mere talking point that a lot of people who defend Israel, not saying you do, but a lot of people who defend Israel try to repackage Israel's violence and contextualize it and make it seem more appropriate to an American audience that is sometimes pro-gay and pro-queer. It rarely ever works. A lot of queer people still don't give a shit. They're like, I don't care. Just stop killing these people is their attitude. So that's it. That's the reality of the matter, is that once Palestine is liberated, then they can have this conversation internally. But right now, Western forces are allowing the death and destruction of this people to continue.
What do you think the odds are that after this stops happening, that the Palestinians are going to get together and say that it's okay to be gay?
I don't know, because I can't even imagine a world where this death and destruction isn't constant. But I would say that just like in the United States of America, you know, people inevitably evolved, inevitably fought back, and
what do you think? I've actually got a really good question.
An environment for queer liberation, even though to this day there are still a shit ton of problems that especially trans people experience on a regular basis.
Oh, I mean, it to me, I'm sure you're on Twitter probably more than I am.
I'm not.
And so, really?
Yeah, I deleted it off my phone. I rarely go on it unless I'm live.
Nick did the same thing. That's crazy. Wow. Okay. Well, okay. I'm on Twitter a lot. How much more racist do you think that it's gotten, and like homophobic do you think it's gotten in the last like 2 years? I think it's like 500x, right?
Yes.
Like it's insane. It's crazy. And I think that it's just it just keeps getting worse too. And I'm curious, like, kind of what your viewpoint is, because we're talking about like kind of how like these different cultures are accepting people. And like now, what do you think about like Saudi Arabia and like the way that they're like, I guess effectively sports washing things? I think that's the term that's being used a lot, right? With like esports, etc. Like, what's your take on that?
I think that Saudi Arabia is also a religious theocracy that is simply trying to moderate their viewpoint in an effort to become more accepted by Western culture and bring in Western capital into the country. Ultimately, if they did become a queer safe haven, for example, overnight, there's still plenty of issues in Saudi society in terms of utilizing slave labor, in terms of death and destruction that befalls like indigenous populations in areas where they want to do building projects. And beyond that, there is the whole genocide in Yemen. A lot of these things can be solved inevitably, and there were some initiative from China that brought Iran and Saudi Arabia to the table to stop the destruction of Yemen, for example. That was relatively successful pre-October 7. But like, there are a shit ton of problems in Saudi Arabia still. Having
Well,
said
just
that,
recently they just let women drive.
yes,
Very recently. Yeah,
yes,
no,
a lot of the
I'm
things, a
fully aware
lot
of
of the
that.
things that
Yeah.
that people who use this kind of sentiment against Palestinians
Yeah.
oftentimes will overlook Saudi Arabia or other Gulf states that have the exact same rules and restrictions. But once again, this is more so about allowing right wing sentiment to fester and dominate a society. There are plenty of members in the Israeli Knesset, for example, that also don't want women to learn how to fucking read and write. This
Oh,
does
it's
not,
so bad. Like
this doesn't,
I absolutely. You're completely right.
and there are plenty of people in America who feel similar ways as well.
I've been
Some of
hearing a
them,
lot of bad things about women being able to vote.
yes,
Yeah.
some of those people gain more prominence in society as society becomes. Some of these people end up gaining more prominence in society, and slowly but surely they try to reorient society to their own desires. That's the reason
True.
why a lot of people fight back against this sort of thing. Okay, that's the reason
Mhm.
why a lot of people fight back. Gay people, queer people, people who are aligned with them fight back against this sort of sentiment in an effort to make sure that it never turns into a society that does this kind of thing to gay people, queer people in general. So,
Does it again? Well, we used to do it for a long time. I mean, gay marriage being legal is very, very recent.
yes. And it's
No,
already,
I totally support that.
yeah. So, my point is,
Yeah.
we've never given the opportunity to many of these countries in the MENA region uh, to be able to have the freedom to continue developing and have their own civil liberties and have their own fight for civil liberties. And we will never be able to see what it would look like if they were given the opportunity without our intervention. We can only look to the past where that intervention wasn't as severe and point to a time when they were relatively open minded, especially in comparison to their European counterparts. But the way that we see what they do, okay, is never translated to the way that we operate here in the United States of America.
How do
I
you
think
figure
that
that?
dynamic. I think that dynamic stems from dehumanization of Arab people in general. That is unfortunately all too commonplace in Western media and in Western society.
I think it happens a lot. I mean, like, and obviously, like after 9/11, I mean, have a number of Arab friends, and they've told me it was a very, very bad time. So I think that you're absolutely right about that, and it is problematic. I don't
Okay.
really think that I don't think that it's fair to say that, like, of course, like all people that are Arabs, and also like, really, it's not about being an Arab. It's about having a religious theocracy that enables you to dehumanize other people.
Yeah,
Because you want to talk
Palestinians
about
don't have a theocracy, by
dehumanization.
the way, just so you understand. Like they don't have anything. They don't have any sort of like real valid form of governance at all. They have never been allowed to have a real valid form of governance or any sort of autonomy or any sort of sovereignty, at least, especially since 1948.
Sure. But like in all of the other places in the same area, pretty much all of them that are doing their own governance
Mm-hmm.
come to the same conclusion about gay people.
Yeah.
They pretty much, yeah,
So,
they do.
so you okay? So this is really interesting that you're saying this because
Yeah.
you recognize that like a lot of those other Gulf states are in alignment with the United States of America and are allowed to operate in whichever ways they see fit, including but not limited to helping Israel. Right? They get F-16s and fleets of American planes, and they get security contracts for their consistent maintenance of American interests in the region.
Do you think I support that?
I don't.
I
I'm
don't.
not even. I'm not
I
even
don't.
saying if you
I
support it or not.
so
I'm
so
simply
here's the
stating that
thing.
like
Oh, go ahead.
monopolizing an entire region of people and assuming that they all are operating on the same boundaries is incorrect. It would be
Of
akin
course,
to
there's always going to be people that are like that. But I also think that they do the same thing to gay people. In the same way that, like, you're looking at everybody and they actually will do it. It doesn't matter whether a gay person is a good person or not. If they're gay in that culture, they can lose their life, they can go to jail, they'll have their
Okay.
life completely ruined.
Okay. You understand that there's a difference between a sovereign nation state that has been a monarchy that America has like funded
Mhm.
and allowed to foster with whatever kind of autonomy, sometimes impunity, as a matter of fact, versus like the Palestinian population, though, right?
I think that definitely there's a big difference, but what I'm saying is that I don't think
Okay.
that difference has been manifested. Like, the difference is that when you have a culture that is derivative off of a religion that I think is oppressive and it hasn't been modernized, you have people that are using it as a tool to oppress other people. I do genuinely think that cultures that are built off of religions like that are inferior. And I
Okay.
think that we've worked really hard to get away from that. And that work isn't done yet. I think it's still going on to this day.
Okay.
And it's disappointing for me because I've seen things go backwards a lot. I think in the
Mm-hmm.
last 2 years, they've gone backwards in a tremendous way. You see it on social media. I saw like there was some bullshit thing about how 21% of Gen Z think Hitler had some good ideas. That's very concerning for me. It's extremely
Mm-hmm.
concerning.
Yeah, I mean it's a lack of education
It
in
is,
America.
among
It's
other
really
things.
bad. But once
Yeah.
again, like what you are what you're what you're doing is something that I see a lot, which is
Okay.
a conflation of conservatism and
Mhm.
reactionary ideals with members of an entire religion. So in the United States of America, right, you have really, really freakish religious guys, right? You have people who want basically the same governance that the Taliban has over Afghanistan, but in the United States of America. Like there are people like that.
I think they've got a lot in common.
Yeah.
They do. I think it's 9 out of
But
10.
then in the United States of America, I'm sure you know plenty of religious people who are very tolerant, even if not literally pro-gay and pro-trans. Even there are non-denominational Christian
We've
churches, for
yeah,
example, that
we've
are
seen a lot of that. And I would apply, I want to make sure that, like, because I think a lot of times in conversations like this, there becomes like this othering of like Arabs or like Islam. I don't really see that as an othering. I think that there's a lot of overlap between Christianity and Islam, right?
okay.
Especially in terms of like, laws, et cetera, and things to believe. And I think that I would view a Christian, like one of these like super like religious zealot Christian people, I would view them trying to push that on other people as the same type of basically inferior culture. I think that it is inferior. That's why
It-
we fought for years and years and years to get rid of it.
okay. So yeah, obviously chattel slavery was justified by Christianity, and chattel slavery was abolished with liberation theology, which is also Christianity. So Christianity, religion, played a formative role in both sides of chattel slavery, both in the justification and maintenance of it, but also played a formative role in the abolition of it. Right.
That's true,
So
but I want to make
so
sure that we're drawing a distinction real quick between following a religion and then having a government that is a religious theocracy
yeah.
that bases its laws off of that religion. I think that most people that are of any religion just want to be able to get along. I
Okay.
think that's very much true.
So
But the problem is that if you have a government that is based off of that religion, I can't think of a single government that's based off of a religion that isn't bad.
well, I mean, Americans are the American Republican Party is desperately trying to bring that back as best as they can, but I
They're
think
trying to
you
make them, they've made it legal to teach that it's mandatory now to teach the Bible in Oklahoma.
yes. So
You saw that. Yeah.
yeah, I did. So you understand that those are people, some of which are genuine like religious zealots, and others who are simply utilizing religion as a galvanizing factor to be like, see, I'm a religious person, right? Like
Oh, I think
people
that
have
we know
different
somebody like that.
aspirations. People have different motivations for why
Yeah.
they advocate for certain things. Okay. So that very
I think
same
that that's
principle,
very common that
yeah,
people use religion as a tool to like kind of enable that type of behavior.
great. So
Sure.
so herein lies the problem.
Mhm.
That very same principle exists in the Muslim world, which is endlessly diverse and there are, you know, it's the fastest growing religion. It is. I think it might have actually overtaken Christianity in terms of numbers. And
I think it's 1.6 billion now. That's the number I last heard.
And
yeah.
Religious governance differs from country to country. I'm Turkish. I come from a country that is nowhere near as fundamentalist. It's supposed to be secular. Obviously, Recep Tayyip Erdogan is very similar to Donald Trump in terms of how he utilized Islam to make himself, to give himself a more prominent role in Turkish society, was able to both bastardize religion and also simultaneously use it for social repression, social oppression, and cultural repression in general. So I personally understand I've withstood the direct consequences of that, of a society being redesigned. And perhaps that is the reason why I know that there's a difference between simply monolithizing an entire religion versus people who are championing religion, Islam in this case, to meet their own authoritarian governance demands. And that's simply what it is. A lot of people don't like the way that their government operates. There are gay Muslims, there are queer Muslims, there are queer trans people. They have unfortunately not had any breathing room to be able to advocate for civil rights in many parts of this region because they have been consistently pushed back against, and also don't have any fucking time or space to be able to do such a thing when they're under direct occupation. That's the issue.
But would you come to the same conclusion that basing decisions off of that religion and making laws based off of that religion is a bad thing?
Yeah, of course. I don't. What do you mean?
Okay.
I don't agree in theocracy at all.
Awesome. But wouldn't that mean that it would be inferior?
Or, no, I wouldn't say. I wouldn't say that any culture is inferior to one another. I would, however, say that. Especially as it pertains to Palestinians, the reason why I don't think it's inferior over the one another is that inferiority is a very dangerous and treacherous language to utilize, especially when there are, hundreds of thousands of dead and wounded people that are in the crosshairs of Israeli violence.
I think that it works. If this is a semantics issue, and if like me saying inferior, if you think that that's dehumanizing or problematic, then I don't necessarily completely agree, but I can see where you're coming from.
Well, the reason
I would say worse, or you could replace that with any other word that is just like not as good as.
Yeah.
But of course that doesn't represent. But even then,
it doesn't matter because then there's something that's better, right? The problem is American culture or like American actions are not necessarily better. That's my point.
They
on
are.
The basis of like on the basis.
It's not even a question. If you have a country and a culture that allows somebody to get killed for their sexual orientation, that is a worse culture than a culture that doesn't.
I think there's
no other way to look at it.
There's something. So here's the thing. There's something that we do in the United States of America, or in the Western world especially, that creates this veneer, this aesthetic that we are somehow morally more progressive and more superior than other countries. I'll give you an example of I can talk about like gay rights in general, but beyond gay rights, one thing that I could talk about especially is for example, slavery, right?
Sure.
We often talk about gulags and slave labor being done in the USSR, in the Orient, like all the way over there, and how damaging that is. Whereas like
being used now in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
whereas slavery is literally codified in the American Constitution under the 13th Amendment. It's just that slavery is appropriate as a mechanism of punishment for those who have done crimes. Another great example of this is bribery, right? We often look at like the barbaric nature of like Pakistani society or Indian society where bribery thrives. There's so much corruption. It's bribery. We have codified bribery
Was it lobbying?
under legal terms. Exactly.
Right.
Lobbying.
Okay. So,
So
I see your point of view, but I don't agree with you about the slavery point. They used to take black people's teeth out of their mouths so they would give them to white people. We don't do that even to prisoners.
no, I know, but
Um,
it's still,
I
but slavery is still
I
an
under
inhumane practice, right? Like you understand that, you agree with that.
I do, but I'm saying that the level and the severity of like the American like transatlantic slave trade is like several measures of
Of course.
worse than the way that prisoners are treated here.
Of course,
Yeah,
no, chattel slavery is a unique evil, and every single historian will agree with you on
sure.
that front. That many cultures have practiced slavery throughout time, none of which as uniquely evil as chattel slavery, because there is obviously a like scientific racial aspect to it in terms of like indentured servitude. Indentured servitude, for
Yeah.
example, did not mean that like your next of kin was also enslaved in a similar fashion, whereas chattel slavery is different because if you're black, that means you are inhumane. It means you're inferior. And the point I was going to make is that,
Sure.
ironically enough, whether you recognize it or not, the exact same arguments and sentiments were expressed towards black people in during chattel slavery in an effort to justify their continued enslavement, that they were inferior.
Can you elaborate on that? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Black people were perceived in an effort to continue in American culture, in American society, in the Western world, in an effort to continue the dominance of black people, in an effort to continue their subjugation. The Americans, or at least like people in positions of power, were like, we need a way to make this appropriate, to make this justifiable, to make this permissible.
Oh,
Because,
I mean, like,
because otherwise, if people start recognizing that these are human beings and not simply fucking capital, not simply, animals or something even worse than animal, then they're going to start feeling bad, and people are going to fuck up the bag.
It isn't new, right? It's not new. It wasn't the succession of kings back in the day. It was the divine succession of kings.
No, yes and no, yes and no. So the reason why I'm saying this, because we both recognize
saying
the
that there's a
uniqueness of chattel
religious
slavery.
You're saying that there is a religious justification that was created so it could be justified that you could do this.
I'm not even talking about the religious justification. No, I'm talking about scientific,
like a moral one?
Scientific justification.
Like eugenics.
Yes, eugenics, which is now seen as a false science, as pseudoscience that was specifically created and designed in an effort to look at this racialized form of violence and justify. And in that process at the time, or rather, the reason why they went to that justification was because, if they were to do this on religious boundaries or on ethnic boundaries, as they had done previously in previous societies, whether it be like the Romans or the Greeks or any other form of like indentured servitude that was practiced in other cultures and other civilizations, you could not engage in the continued dominance of black people that way, because what if they become Christian, right? Or when you bring black people here, they learn the culture, they can they can integrate into society inevitably. So in order to create this like continued dominance, they sought out the scientific, in air quotes, the pseudoscientific understanding of black inferiority, African inferiority. Their culture is barbaric.
I think, are you trying to draw a parallel between like the eugenics argument for like subjugating black people and my argument for saying that like the like a religious theocracy is inferior? Is that kind of like where you're going?
Where I'm going is that in order for Western cultures, in order for Western nations to continue their dominance over other nation states, there is a direct through line of creating an air of inferiority while simultaneously destabilizing these places in an effort to maintain their underdeveloped status, which oftentimes will result in people behaving in more violent manners.
If you fuck with people, they're not going to like it.
Yes.
I agree with you. I think that's
Okay.
very true. Absolutely. I don't really think that there's really much of a disagreement there. I think that like absolutely that's what's happened. But if I'm looking at it from like my point of view, I do think that like the culture that we have is a better culture. I don't think that you can compare it to eugenics. I don't think you can say like, for example, like with eugenics where they're like comparing like shapes of somebody's skull or something like that versus like whether somebody is allowed to be gay or not without being prosecuted or killed. I don't really think that these two things are equivalent. I think
Okay.
that one of them is absolutely a lot worse.
No,
And it's much more definitive.
I'm simply mentioning the rhetoric that is utilized in this process. Like one of the
I have no
examples
problem.
one of the examples
So,
is like the
go ahead.
indigenous population, right? Which is
Like Native Americans?
yes, which is ironic
Sure.
that we're having this conversation today. A
Columbus
lot
Day.
of the early justifications of settler colonial violence was met with, well, the natives are barbaric. The indigenous population is killing one another. They're practicing bloodletting. They're cannibals and whatnot. Some of which was not
Yeah.
true at all, and others that might have been true. Now,
Well, there's a lot of it that was true. I mean, they did some crazy shit down there.
So ultimately, it still does not justify the inhumane and horrific practice of full-scale genocide, which is infinitely more barbaric than anything that you could basically say about the indigenous population, right?
I would say to an extent, yeah. Like if you want to talk about like how the Spanish treated them, yeah, it was really bad.
Okay, so it's
Sure.
a far greater evil, right? Like
Right.
instead of um, fostering a non-hostile relationship with the indigenous population and collaborating with them, instead of doing that, full-scale domination and ethnic cleansing was the far worse evil in that process, right? Because human beings are still human beings at the end of the day. You can like reason with them, you can talk to them. There is no greater evil in terms of like evil Olympics. Like genocide is up there. It's the worst thing you can do to a entire group of people.
You're totally right.
Yeah.
I completely agree with you because like yeah, you can't talk to them or anything like that. But what I'm saying is that I think that those people were killing others of them all the time. Like they were doing that too. This is I mean we're doing an evil tier list, right?
Yeah.
And so like you're saying that this one is kind of a little bit worse than the others.
No,
And
not
I
a
think
little bit. No. I think far worse.
Okay.
Far more
I mean,
damaging.
that's
Far more
fine.
damaging historically and throughout time. Like, I guess my argument is like, I
Yeah.
don't care if, like, for example, Jewish people in the Holocaust, like, if they were homophobic, for example, like, I don't think that would justify the Holocaust.
No.
You agree
Obviously
with that,
not.
right? Okay.
Yeah, of course not.
Then what your statements about Palestinian culture and the reason why a lot of people on Twitter are mad at you now is a similar sentiment being expressed, whether it was inadvertent or not, that their inferior culture is being wiped out, and you don't care if an inferior culture is being wiped out. Like that's
I'm not going to support a culture that demonizes and kills people for their identity. I'm never going to support a culture that does that. It doesn't matter whether it's Christian, Islamic, or anything atheist. Any time that a culture is killing people for their identity, that culture is evil, and they are committing an act of evil. It's completely indefensible.
Well, I think there are some issues with that sentiment, especially when you compare, for example, what the American government did in World War II. We support the Allied forces. We root for easy company, as my friend Felix Biederman always says, regardless of how America was segregated at the time, an incredibly unfair and inhumane practice, right? Americans were not exactly woke on gay people at the time. Americans were not exactly woke on black people at the time. There were horrifying things that we did to black soldiers in the aftermath of World War II, as a matter of fact.
And we've gotten a
And
lot
yet,
better since
but
then.
but
We
hold
have.
on. But
Okay.
ultimately, right? We still celebrate the Allied forces and their accomplishments in World War II, right? In defeating Adolf Hitler and liberating these concentration camps. The problem is, in terms of like the analysis, in terms of people resisting against like Israeli occupation, a similar dynamic exists. These are guys who I don't agree with in terms of their own domestic affairs, in terms of the way that they govern themselves. But the problem is, they don't have, like, there is no opportunity for normal Palestinian civilians to go out and take it to the streets and like fight back against their own governments to be able to get to that point in terms of civil liberties for queer people. They've never had that opportunity. So I see it in the same exact way. Like, I ride for easy company. And I think that I am not going to sit here and criticize people resisting against the Israeli apartheid for that same exact reason, because it's a far greater evil than anything that people could potentially do. Genocide is the thing. It's the worst possible thing you can do to an entire population.
But they would be doing the genocide to people based off of their identity.
No, you can't imagine that, is what I'm saying. You can't, like, and you can't point to Saudi Arabia as a reason for why you think they would, especially when historically they haven't. And beyond that, there's never been an opportunity for them to be liberated so they could even fight back against so that normal Palestinians could fight back against, like, you know, whatever kind of religious oppression that might come afterwards.
So your perspective is that you think that if Israel wasn't doing this, that Palestine would, like, basically progress through these social issues in the same way that we have.
I think all people, when they no longer are subjects of colonial oppression, will inevitably come to that recognition, just like Americans did, where there is more breathing room, where there's more of an opportunity for people to fight back, in that, like, work their way through those hierarchical needs. And yes, queer liberation is a part of that. Feminism is a part of that. Feminist movements are a part of that, and that's how societies are allowed to evolve and you know, become a different version of what they once were. The problem is there's never been an opportunity for them. Now, having said that, just like I talked about, you know, Easy Company and the Allied forces during World War II, like, you root for them against Adolf Hitler, right? Because Adolf Hitler was doing a genocide.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the same principle here for the Palestinian liberation, is that regardless of what their attitude is, regardless of what their cultural attitude might be, the governance specifically, because Hamas in and of itself is an Islamist fundamentalist organization that has evolved throughout the years. But having said that, it is still, you know, they're definitely guys who maybe I don't see the world in the same ways with, and don't agree with their form of, like, internal governance. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, because their primary what?
Yeah, it's pretty bad though.
Yeah,
I mean, the way
and the reason why I don't spend a lot of time and emphasis on that is because their primary role for existence in general, as Palestinian statehood has evolved, or the Palestinian emancipation movement has evolved over the course of 76 years, they have become the only party that is ready to resist against the Israeli settler colonial occupation. So that's my analysis there. It's that it's not going to stop. Palestinian people are going to continue to be mercilessly and ruthlessly dominated by the Israeli apartheid, as they have historically. And I'm not going to fault and find ways in which, like, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the disagreements that I have with either their tactics or even the way that they would potentially govern themselves, because I think it bears no basis in the grander scheme of things.
I do criticize the tactics, especially, like, I mean, that was the October 7th thing. I mean, a lot of random civilians and people that weren't involved were getting killed. It's evil when they do it, and it's evil when Israel does it.
Yeah. But again,
I think that was it was a terrible
that's a
thing.
you made a great
Yeah.
statement. I have also condemned the death and
I know
destruction of
you don't
civilians.
support it.
Now,
Yeah, I know, I know that.
but listen. Going back to the Nat Turner Rebellion, or the Haitian Revolution, or the Algerian Revolution, or the struggle against the apartheid in South Africa, history is riddled with violent actions that move the needle in terms of liberation. But when all is said and done, you don't think about the practice of putting a fucking tire around collaborators in apartheid South Africa and lighting them on fire. You think about how gross and inhumane the practice of the maintenance of the apartheid was. Because if you spent a whole lot of time on what the tactics of the liberation were, it would almost come across as a justification, right? And that's my point.
I don't. Okay. So you think like, and I could see where somebody would think that. Sure, I could see where somebody would come from that perspective. I don't really think that it's justified at all. I don't think that we should be fucking with them. I don't think we should be funding Israel. I think it's disgusting. It's a waste of everybody's money. Like you were talking about universal health care earlier. I think it'd be a lot easier for us to do that if we weren't shipping a bunch of bombs and resources overseas to kill random people. I totally agree with you. But I very much think that it's wishful thinking that the moment that Israel stops attacking Palestine, or Palestine has some degree of independence, queer liberation is going to begin. I think that will only happen in the situation where a religious theocracy no longer exists in any capacity.
Well, religious theocracy has never existed in Palestine regardless. They've never had a form of governance, let alone a religious theocracy, especially because
do you think they're not making decisions based off of religion over there?
Yeah, there is no religious theocracy at all. They're not like following the rule of Islam or anything like that, or whatever your understanding of a religious theocracy is. No, there are religious fundamentalists within the governance structure. But once again, it bears it's not a part of the decision-making structure.
So where do you think
it is not a significant aspect of it's not a significant aspect of their day-to-day existence, because
where do you think they got the idea to kill gay people then, or to put them in jail? Where did that idea come from? If it wasn't from religion.
What do you mean?
Well, where would it have come from?
It is ultimately irrelevant in the grand scheme of things, because they are still under a permanent occupation. That's my point.
But it did come from. My point is that it came from a religion.
Okay, religious theocracy is it's conservatism that you're criticizing, not specifically religious theocracy would be the final stage of conservatism in general. But what you're not recognizing in this process is that Palestinian civil governance, in terms of their mistreatment of gay people or anything like that, is totally and utterly irrelevant, especially when the only thing that we are doing in terms of our intervention there is to literally galvanize people with some more fundamentalist, some more reactionary perspectives by killing every single person.
True.
So if your goal is to I guess abolish homophobia, destroy queerphobia in general, you can't keep bombing these places. You need to allow these societies to redevelop, and then civil liberation will come. Just like in the United States of America, some form of that has existed, some form of that occurred because a lot of gay people and their allies fought long and hard, and inevitably in 2013 we allowed gay marriage to happen legally. Right? Even though there's always going to be a constant push and pull, there are still plenty of people who are trying to take that back as well. But my solution for that is never to bomb and kill and massacre people who have these opinions.
I don't think that that's the right option either, but I'm not going to support a culture of people where that is the default. And I don't think that it's as simple as saying that because we're bombing them and because this Maslow's hierarchy of needs is happening, that this is the outcome. They I don't really see how it's congruent. That
you can see how it's inconsistent though, right? Because You're
Well,
saying that you don't want to bomb like a religious enclave, a white religious enclave in Alabama,
I don't
but
want
you
to
won't
bomb
support
Israel.
them. But
No,
if they
I'm not
were being
supporting. No.
bombed, I don't think you would sit idly by. You say this is fucking completely inappropriate. You wouldn't be like, well, they're inferior in terms of their culture, so they kind of, you can make up your mind on whether they deserve it or not. But I don't remember the exact quote you said, but like I'm pretty sure it was something along the lines of like, they're gonna get wiped out, and because they're inferior, that's fine. So if you view your fellow American citizens as human beings, the Palestinians are no different in that regard.
I think it's definitely different if you're talking about people that are from your country or not. Absolutely, it's different.
Wait, why?
Well, because they're part of your country, they're part of your culture. You're accountable to them in a completely different way. Like, of course, I'm going to feel more accountability and I'm going to care more about somebody who lives in my country than somebody that's across the world. Of course, I would think that. It's not even a question.
No, they're not. Wait, but the underlying fundamentals here is that they're human beings with dreams.
Sure.
And different opinions, or maybe even the same opinions, and same exhibiting the same stages of life that you're exhibiting, and therefore all life must be cherished, and their lives should be no different in your analysis. If we're looking at like right and wrong, their lives are no different, even if they disagree fundamentally with you culturally. They don't deserve to be bombed.
No. I don't want to have them bombed. Like, that's why I don't want to support Israel. I don't want to have anything to do with it. I don't want to support this.
Okay,
I don't
but
want to have
Israel is
anything to
still
do with it.
bombing them, and
Sure.
and when you say one culture is inferior in the process of them being wiped out, saying that you're okay with them being wiped out and not saying that you support them makes it feel like you're fine with the way that things are unfolding.
I don't want to involve and entangle the country in another issue like that. I don't want to be involved with it one way or another. And no, I don't think that if they stopped getting bombed, they would just start being accepting of these other people with these different identities.
You don't know, because we've never experienced that.
Because there's other countries that are part of that same region that have the same laws, like Saudi Arabia or Qatar.
They're not the same people. You do understand that, right? Like even culturally speaking,
they're coming from the same culture, and they're coming from the same religion.
No, that Asmongold.
Do you really think?
I don't know how to describe this to you. Well, one, because you're talking to someone who is from that culture and from that region, who is like of a Muslim background, comes from a 98% Muslim country. So, and you know what my fucking opinion is in general. You know what my worldview is. So I think you understand there's a genuine diversity of thought there. Monolithizing an entire region of people is literally just...
You're allowed that diversity of thought because you're not there.
No, that's not true. There are plenty of Turkish people who fight back against the Turkish government currently, and Turkey was significantly more secular, many, many years ago, before the Erdogan regime came through and utilized religion as a bastardized version of religion as a way to invoke social repression. Turkey is still far more modernized and far more tolerant than some of these counterparts that you're talking about. But ultimately, there is no like singular attitude that every single person from this region has. Just like there is no singular attitude in the United States of America. That's why I gave you the example of like Christian fundamentalists living in a white enclave in Alabama versus fundamentalists that exist in the region. They are not like, there is no unified monolithic understanding within the Muslim world. That is not the case at all. And there have been plenty of initiatives to fight against social repression in these countries. It's just that it is virtually impossible to successfully implement these sorts of strategies when you're too busy worrying about like if America is going to bomb you or not. That's the point. Or if America
do you think
props
Dubai
up...
is worried about America bombing them?
Who? Dubai?
Yeah.
No, that Dubai is the other side of Dubai is the other side of the equation. That's the point. It's either you're worried about America bombing you, so you can't even engage in any sort of like initiative to fight back against your own government, or the American government is offering you so much security in terms of like the military that a violent repression is all but inevitable if you try to push back. The point, however, is that do you think that there are no homosexual people living in Dubai? Of course there are. It's more so that they are repressed and are unable to fight back because America has propped up these monarchs and giving them a shit ton of weapons to be able to continue dominating their own citizens.
I think that you blame too much of all of this on America. I think that America does play a role in this.
Forget America. It doesn't matter. America is a catch-all term here. Like
Sure.
It's whoever is like offering religious fundamentalists an opportunity to continue dominating their own population. If it wasn't America, it'd be a different country if they were doing the same thing. It just happens to be that it is America right now because it is the global hegemonic superpower.
Sure. Yeah. No, I see what you're saying. I think that the big problem is that if you have a religion and you are basing your culture off of that religion, and that religion is used to oppress people, that type of culture is inferior. And whether that changes in the future, whether anything happens in the past, is irrelevant. At this current point, the way that they handle things is awful. It is absolutely
there is no, but
awful.
also again, we have to both recognize that like Palestinians are not handling anything but just a genocide right now. So there is no
completely right.
Okay, so when you recognize that, and you talk about the barbaric nature or the immoral nature of like Palestinian existence without analyzing it within the framework of 76
I never
years
said that it was I never said that it was barbaric or their existence. I said that their behavior and the way that they treat people is bad. It's extremely bad and it's inferior to ours.
It's not a real thing at all. No, because it's not. You said they were inferior.
I did.
It is completely outside of the scope of Palestinians when they do not have any sort of sovereignty. I think you did use the term barbaric, if I'm not mistaken. But once again,
the behavior is barbaric. The people are not, obviously, right? I mean, like, of course, every person that lives in a country does not have the same viewpoints. But the country as an entity, or any sort of group of people as an entity, does have this viewpoint.
Okay.
And the U.S. used to have this viewpoint too.
Yeah. And in that time frame, if the United States was being mercilessly and ruthlessly bombed by, I guess, an alien force that is, because like the power dynamic, the disproportionality of the power that like a nuclear armed militant state in the region that is backed by the hegemonic superpower America is incomprehensible from the perspective of Americans. So I have to use like an alien force with superior technology in this situation. If we were getting fucking ruthlessly slaughtered by an alien force, I wouldn't give a fuck if someone was homophobic or not. I'd be like, thank you for fighting against the alien force. That seems awesome that you're doing that. I would actually arm up side by side with my fellow homophobic Republican rabid Christian fundamentalist sociopaths to try and protect my home. And that's the point.
I think that that's probably true to an extent, but there's not really an alien invasion. I mean, that's not even what's happening.
No, I know. The only reason why I'm using that as a hypothetical is because there is no world power that represents that disproportionality that America and Israel present over an occupied territory of Palestinians that literally cannot even engage in regular foreign trade, and Israel dominates their life to such a degree that like they literally used to deny cookies from entering the Gaza Strip or pasta from entering the Gaza Strip, a practice that the Israeli Kojat authorities considered putting the Palestinians on a diet. That level of ruthless domination over the course of 76 years is probably going to harden you against the group that is dominating you, is probably going to make you hate the group that is dominating you.
Sure,
and it's
but you're not
righteous
being
and
dominated
correct
by gay
to hate
people.
them.
You're
What's
not
up?
being dominated by gay people. You're not being dominated by transsexual people. Like,
What?
I totally agree that, yes, of course, like,
No,
it
no.
makes
Gay
sense
people
that
and trans people,
Palestinians.
gay people and trans people are not a part of what I'm saying. I'm saying
Mhm.
that the gay people and the trans people that are living under those conditions in Gaza,
Yeah.
right, see Israel as a far larger problem in their existence than they do like Islamic fundamentalism in terms of governance, which hasn't even been like a real way that Palestinians be able to govern themselves because they've never had sovereignty. That's the point. And I talk to gay people in the region
Yeah,
all the
sure.
time. I talk to gay people in Lebanon. They have a similar opinion. It's not like Hezbollah is a fan of gay people in Lebanon.
I've heard about
Eh,
that. Yes.
yeah, and yet they also view Israel as a far larger, far more violent, far more consequential force of evil than they do Hezbollah. Now, there are naysayers. You will find some people who are like, oh, I'm so glad that Israel is bombing Lebanon as a Lebanese person, certainly. But that is the reality that unfolds time and time again. And there are a million historical examples and a million contemporary examples I can point to when a much larger sovereign nation comes in and blows up your house. All of a sudden, you're not thinking about sucking dick. Okay. You're just not. You're not thinking about getting gender confirmation surgery or being able to fucking get your HRT on time. You're thinking, oh my God, my house exploded. What the fuck do I do? You're thinking, I have to run. And you're feeling grateful for people who are fighting back. That's just it. And that's the existence for Palestinian people. It's not necessarily that they're like monolithically barbaric or immoral or inferior to Western culture. It's just that they're busy being like, I want cookies sometimes. And that would be nice if I could get it. And that's on a good day, by the way. On a bad day,
I'm
like
sure.
yesterday, they're thinking, oh my God, my family members burned in a tent hospital in Al-Aqsa because Israel lit it on fire.
Well, who says Israel's good? Israel, like, I don't think anybody
No,
thinks
I
Israel
know,
is good.
but
I'm just saying that, like, that culture, and, like, again,
it's
if
not
you go back to
that
it,
culture is my point. You can't
I'm not,
monolithize an entire group of people,
well, of
Asmon. That's the
course
point.
no, you can't. But what you can say is that the people that are controlling it, like you said with Hezbollah, these people are not fans of this. And I'm not going to try to be guilt tripped into picking the lesser of two evils. And I don't think that after this conflict is over, if it ever ends, I don't think that they're going to magically get together and just let gay people do what they want. I don't
Okay, but
think that's what's going to happen.
you're imagining a world without any sort of evidence by pointing to other countries in the region that are literally
Yes.
directly at odds with these two groups of individuals that are directly funding and facilitating and allowing Israel to continue doing this kind of thing. By pointing to them and saying, well, this is just the nature of this people. And that is not the case. And that is my point.
Oh, it's not the
And
nature of the people. It's a culture. It's an ideology. Of
it
course.
would be like saying, sorry, America is an inferior culture circa 2013, or America is still an inferior culture when Trump inevitably wins in 2024 and implements some of the things that they wanted to implement in terms of, like, the Supreme Court has openly stated that they want to fucking even revoke the Obergefell decision. Like, when that happens, I don't think you will say America is an inferior culture. I think you will say that there are a lot of religious fundamentalists that have overtaken this government and is now moving America in the wrong direction. And if you can understand that for your fellow citizens,
I would say that. I would say that it would become inferior. Absolutely.
okay.
And I think that if you compare our culture that we have now to 20 years ago, we are superior than we were 20 years ago. And I
Okay.
think that if
My
you look
point-
at
my
40
point
years ago,
is-
it's even more the case. And I think it continues to become
So you
more
understand
the
that.
case.
That's great. Okay. So
Yes.
my point, however, is that now add on to that equation a military force that is so much more powerful that, like, there is no global current existing counter. Like, I can't say this about China. Like, the difference in military might between China and America is that America is still far greater in terms of military superpower than China is. there is no comparison between the disproportionality of the violence that Palestinian people face from Israel and America that like suits the bill of like Americans potentially being dominated and destroyed. If Donald Trump was, which is the reason why I use the hypothetical example of an alien force with like mega nukes or something that can just like wipe out entire cities overnight, just to help you understand the proportionality of this violence that Palestinians are subjected to. If Donald Trump tomorrow came into power and moved America in that direction, and then aliens invaded America, I think yourself and myself, alongside everyone else, would try our very best to fight back against the aliens, rather than turn around and be like, well, hold up now. You know, we gotta really figure out gay marriage again. We gotta bring back gay marriage right now. We can't do that. And that's precisely what has happened to the Palestinian population.
I don't think that's what's going to happen. And I understand, like, I feel like you are very optimistic about this. I don't share that optimism.
I'm not. I'm realistic, because it bears no basis. Like, the cultural hangups at this moment are utterly irrelevant. Just like African tribes and their practices of like maybe homophobia or whatever the fuck people said at the time, some of which was true and some of which was not, did not justify chattel slavery, or the Nat Turner Rebellion did not justify the reaction to continue the dominance and the practice of chattel slavery.
I think that there's nobody. I don't think there's anybody that's like justifying any genocide, right? I'm not justifying. I don't think anybody would justify.
I know, but I think that when you say that they're an inferior culture, and I won't defend them, understandably, people think, oh, okay, so you don't have an issue with the way things are unfolding currently.
I mean, I think that people are going to interpret things however they want to in order to make it seem like it's something that fits their worldview that they've already decided on.
Fair, I think would you say it's fair that people make that would make that assumption about your statements when there's an ongoing genocide that you consider to be inappropriate and unjustifiable?
I think that it's bad. For sure. Of course it's bad.
Okay.
People are going to look at that. They're going to look at what I say, and they're going to make their decision off of that for whatever reason, right? I have no idea. One thing that I've learned on the internet is that it doesn't matter what you say. Most people have already decided if you're right or wrong before they watch the clip. That's really the truth. So I'm not really that concerned about that. Of course, I don't support killing random fucking people, right? Nobody supports killing random fucking people. But if you're talking about supporting a country and supporting a government or like a group that is in power, I would absolutely not support one that uses that power to oppress people based off of their identity. I think
that's fine, but like I said, there has not been a single moment where the Palestinians have had any breathing room outside of like Israeli occupation where they have engaged in this sort of self-governance that you speak of. So it doesn't necessarily matter in the grand scheme of things where there's an active genocide going on.
Here's the thing. I really hope that we can end the genocide. The Palestinians will be able to make their own decisions, and we'll see which one of us is right about this.
Okay.
I do. That's my perspective.
Okay.
Because I don't think I can convince you, and I don't think you can really convince me about this. But I think that we do agree.
No. I'm saying it doesn't matter. To me, it doesn't matter, because it's not because I don't care about queer liberation. Of course I do. But I understand, as do you, by the way, that genocide is the far greater evil, that it bears no basis in my analysis on whether genocide is right or wrong, as do you also admit. So I'm not going to sit here and be like, well, Palestinians are, barbaric, especially because like they're not. And I understand that Palestinians are people just like Americans are, right? And that some have these kinds of opinions and others don't. And ultimately it doesn't matter. Like the way you just said earlier in this conversation, that of course you're going to have a different way of analyzing, your fellow Americans, right? In comparison to the way you analyze and interpret this entire region of people, that is like, whether, I don't know if you recognize this or not, but that is like at the heart of right-wing sentiment or bigoted sentiment, which then opens up the floodgates to a lot of other justifications that befall the Palestinian population. Whether you're doing that inadvertently or not doesn't change that dynamic. Because
are we really trying to say that you know, people are going to have the same values? They're going to care about a group of people across the world just as much as the people in their own town? Like, I think that that's just so divorced from reality.
I genuinely do believe that. And I personally have that opinion. So yes, I am telling you right now 100%, and it's not because I'm from Turkey or grew up in a Muslim country that I have this opinion. It is an opinion that I have, and that's precisely the way. That's precisely the reason why I say to you right now that there are people that are directly at odds with the way I view the world. There are people who want to kill me, and I still wish the best upon them. I mean this genuinely. I want them to get healthcare. I want them to have educational opportunities, and I want them to have a ladder of upward social mobility, because I truly believe that if they had these material freedoms, that it would be less likely for them to become right-wing charlatans or people who want to fucking kill me in general. Like, that's my point. And that's how that is exactly how I view all world conflicts, that these are people. There's a diversity of opinion amongst any group of people, and there is nothing different about them, regardless of where they were born, regardless of what they believe, that if given the same exact opportunities, if a Palestinian that was born in Gaza was instead born in the United States of America, they would be just like every other American. There is no difference between the way they see the world. There is no value that is like genetically brought upon them. They are all responding to stimuli in the same way that you are. They're responding to their material conditions in the same exact way that you are. The only difference is they were born under a colonial rule, an occupation that is very brutal and very humiliating, that dominates every aspect of their lives, whereas you and I, myself included, were born in the United States of America, and therefore we have a tremendous amount more freedom in terms of like in terms of what we believe, what kind of opportunities we want to pursue. And
we don't live in a religious theocracy, because that would be worse.
No, it's not. There is no intractable quality of people born under a religious theocracy. Like, no one, if you were to talk to regular Saudi citizens, or regular citizens from Qatar, or regular citizens from Dubai, there are plenty of people who don't like that form of governance, who want something to change, who want to change their governments so that they can live free lives in the same way that Americans, to a certain degree, in comparison to those other countries, can live freely and express themselves sexually, even though there is plenty of setbacks here in modern America as well, towards trans people, for example. And the only difference is where they were born. And I don't think that is a sentence of that automatically means that they're immoral people. I do not make my assumptions about an entire region of the planet just by the nature of where they were born. I talk to people as they're human beings.
If you took everybody that was in China and you put them in a random place, what do you think the laws would be like? Do you think they'd be like Chinese laws?
What do you mean? Like where? Like if everyone in China was born in the United States of America, I think that the American governance would be exactly the same. It's entirely dependent on the material conditions, and it dependent on geology, dependent on your natural resources. Like, I don't know how much more they would differ, but if a shit ton of Chinese people immigrated into the United States of America, for example, as they have, yes, they would become Americanized, as is the case with undocumented migrants, for example. There are plenty of studies conducted on this as well. We can talk about that too if you want.
I think that's so that's a good point, but I also think that whenever you've had large contingencies of people from other cultures that come into, like, let's say the UK, they have tried to push for other laws. They have tried to change the laws there. They
What do you mean?
absolutely have.
What do you
Um,
mean?
about like people pushing for new laws
Like in terms of what?
in
Like,
terms of how people can express themselves, in terms of how people can act in public. Yes.
you need to elaborate a little bit. I'm a little confused
Sure.
about what you're saying.
What I'm saying is that there have been a lot of instances where people that have come from another country that come into a new country make the new country like their old country. I think that's what would make
Is
sense.
there an example of this in modern history or in any time in American history at all?
Yeah. An example is that so I live in Austin, Texas, and I can drive over to other parts of Austin, Texas that are a lot closer to Mexico than they are like America. They have Spanish names, and there's a bunch of people there because a lot of those people came from another culture. Absolutely.
Wait,
I
I mean
think that's the same everywhere
Texas is probably the worst example for this because like
because of the war,
well, no, because
like the
Texas,
border and
the
everything.
border crossed them is
Yeah,
what
yeah,
the
yeah,
common
sure.
sentiment is in
Right.
general. But in terms of like Texas culture, I don't. I mean, Texas. Here, I'll give you actual data on this. Right, studies are
Sure.
conducted on this stuff all the time. There's always a new group of migrants that are coming from a specific part of the world, whether it's because they're like economic refugees, economic migrants, or if they're like escaping war or some kind
Yeah.
of like political struggle in their in the on the home front, right? And whenever there's always there is a violent resistance to that, and the qualities of that violent resistance, like that immediate reaction, doesn't necessarily change until they become a part of the in group. A great example I can give you is the Irish, for example, or the Italian migration
Yeah.
that has occurred in the United States of America. Similar attitudes were demonstrated towards Italian people or Irish people. Oh, they're changing the
look,
culture.
bro, like there are so many redneck like Hispanic people here. The super Republican, yes. And they are the ones that are always about build the wall. Yes,
Yeah.
no, I totally you're completely right.
Okay, so they
course that
become
happens.
Americanized, and there's data for this as well. So the data shows that
Oh, it
by
happens
the
and it
second
doesn't happen.
generation, the data shows that by the second generation, regardless of where people are coming from, whether it's Guatemala, whether it's Mexico, whether it's a Latin American country or Norway, by the second generation or China, Americans assimilate almost completely, and by the third generation, they have completely assimilated. And there are examples of this around you that you can probably point to. People that are maybe two generations removed from being fresh off the boat, or one generation removed from being fresh off the boat, that are impossible to associate with anything but American culture. The people that you
We had in
meet
my
on
high school, we had a lot of Eric Hernandez's.
yeah. So
I totally understand what you're
so
saying.
that is what I mean when I say like most people that come from other cultures that are deemed inferior or declared different ultimately do end up assimilating to
Well, that
the culture of the country that they immigrated to.
well, two generations later, isn't the
generation by
same
generation
people.
that changes rapidly.
Well, I mean, you're talking about like, you know, the way that one person is like two generations later. Of course, I'm not going to be like my grandfather. I'm sure you're not either. Of
Yeah.
course, people change over time. But
Yeah,
I'm
so that
saying that if you take people from a culture, those are going to be their values. That is their values. Now, will that change over time based off of where they're at? Absolutely it will. Of course it will. But
okay.
it's not like a switch. It's not some like switch like somebody just comes over somewhere and they're just completely different.
Yeah, but
And so
ultimately, second generation, it changes. So like their next of kin that is born on U.S.
yeah,
soil with the same rights and same responsibilities, like ultimately exhibit the exact same outcomes, regardless. Once they are firmly a part of the in group, so ultimately, I guess that like kind of it kind of goes against the argument that you were presenting earlier that you
mhm,
also recognize, right? Like that these people, they come in and they are not monolithic, Okay, they are not monolithic in their understanding of the world at all. And while there might be some cultural differences, ultimately, nothing like inferior or superior to one another. I don't.
No, I don't
personally
know
engage
about
in
that. I don't know about that. I think that there are differences that are inferior and superior. It's not even a question.
I don't think that people are. I don't think that people are impossible to change. That is not something that I believe.
But having to change them implies that they should change.
I don't think
that's what
people,
I'm saying.
Yes,
I think that some things should
I think
change.
that in terms of inferiority, I wouldn't necessarily say cultural inferiority. I'd say conservatism. That's the way I view the world. Like, from my perspective, I think that a lot of the things that people point to, a lot of the issues that people point to, actually is just simply conservatism being repackaged as like an intractable quality of a different culture.
Okay, let me ask you this question. Do you think that we'd be having this conversation if I said conservatism instead? Because, like, obviously, like, a lot of people are upset about it.
Because it's an entirely different thing. Because conservatism can change. People can change their minds. People can change their attitudes. But people cannot change their like the way that they're analyzed by the in-group that is the dominant group in power. If they're being analyzed as like an intractable, inalienable group of like a force almost that is like completely monolithic. Yes, if you were to say that the conservatism demonstrated by certain groups is inferior to I don't know, like broader. It's not even that their conservatism is different. It's just conservatism adjusted to their material conditions as well.
I feel like you kind of have the same viewpoint on this that I do, though. Like, it's just that, like, your vocabulary is different.
No, because
I think that really okay.
No, of course not. Because for me, it's not like the cultural differences. I like to say that there's a universality to hogs. I call conservatives hogs all the time. I do hog watch, whatever, right? And
I've seen it.
And the reason why I don't have an issue saying that, even though many people get very upset at me when I say things like that, is because conservatism or liberalism, okay, is just simply a way of understanding the world. Reactionary approaches to understanding the world is simply a way that you look at the regular stimuli that you experience on a daily basis, and your analysis can change. Your analysis can very easily change, and you can be an entirely different person. There's a shit ton of people that are in my community that used to be right-wing on one issue or many other issues that have over time understood and demonstrated empathy and have changed their minds on these issues and no longer consider themselves to be conservative. Whereas when you engage in like cultural inferiority in conversations like that, there is an intractable quality that is associated with this like entire group of individuals, and entire group of people, instead of individualizing them as like people that might have a different perspective than you that can change over time, you end up treating them as the other. And that is what I try to fight against on a regular basis here as well. Like, there are groupings that are appropriate, like, for example, Nazis, people who believe in Nazi ideology or fascist ideology. You can group them just as well as you can group like socialists or any other form of ideology, and you can associate certain aspects of their understanding of the world as like, you can ascribe certain aspects of the way that they analyze the world as good or bad. But when you start talking about like inferior cultures, that sets up the opportunity for historically, at least, dehumanization, and also it justifies a lot of the atrocities that those people end up experiencing.
But you do agree that those viewpoints, though, are worse, right?
What do you mean?
Well, like, for example, being against it's against the law to be gay. Like, this is a worse viewpoint.
I think it's
okay.
I think that bigotry of that sort is, of course, abhorrent. I do not agree with that at all. But
how would you define that?
But
like, I mean, would you say
not,
would you say conservatism is inferior to liberalism?
I think conservatism is wrong. That's the way I see it. I do personally consider it to be inferior, but I also have the understanding that like the conservatives here in the United States of America are conservative within the boundaries that are permissible to American society. They respond to American material conditions. If
Yeah.
the conservative mindset, which can change, okay, because no one is born a reactionary, no one is born a conservative. But let's say someone was someone that is conservative here, if they automatically teleported and adjusted to the material conditions of like conservatism in Iran, they would be no different than the mullahs. That's my opinion. Like, and that's precisely the reason why plenty of Americans.
Yes, I totally agree with you about that. I think that if you got together a lot of preachers in like, these southern racist churches, you group them up with people from the Taliban, I think that they'd have a lot in common.
Yes.
I totally
even
agree
the
with
likes
you.
of
And
even
I
the likes
think,
of Ben Shapiro,
yes,
it's adjusted to American society. It doesn't have to be a
absolutely.
one-to-one comparison. It's adjusted to American
Yes.
society because ultimately, what do our conservatives do? Like an example I use regularly is you have the what's that fucking church that always goes to like even
Westboro Baptist Church.
Yeah, Westboro Baptist Church. Like those guys are fucking insane, right?
They are.
But what do? Instead of going and rising up in arms and like fucking murking gay people, they go and protest outside of like, I don't know, non-denominational churches, or they go protest like at a gay funeral. And then what do? They go back home and eat $5 jalapeno poppers at Applebee's, because that is the material reality of living in the United States of America. A lot of your needs are fulfilled. A lot of your needs are met. If the dynamic was that America resembled, I don't know, the Korengal Valley, or America resembled fucking the material conditions of like a Gaza, you bet your fucking ass that those guys would absolutely, or Iran is a better example in this circumstance, they would be doing the same shit. They would be doing not even the shit that the mullahs are doing. They'd be doing ISIS shit. They'd be fucking throwing gay people off the roofs. You know what I mean? And thank God that we have American culture.
No, but it's not. But you see, in check.
No, but that's not American culture. You see, that is American material reality. It is our material reality that we've created through our culture. No, culture is not what created this material reality. I absolutely disagree with that. Yes, it is American domination that that there is an invisibility to, that has allowed us to live in the heart of luxury. There is no cultural underpinning that made Americans like exist in the way that they do. It's more so just military dominance.
You think a culture has no impact on the success of a country?
No, I don't think so. I think that culture is created after the material realities. Yeah, no, I don't think that there's like anything unique. See, that's what I mean. Do you think that there is some uniqueness to like someone being American? And if you think that there's a uniqueness to someone being American, then what happened before America even existed, right? Or if there's a uniqueness to someone being American, do you think that they like any person living somewhere else would directly be at odds if they were to come into the United States of America, and they would not be able to Americanize?
I think some people aren't. And I'm sure there's a spectrum for that. There's some people that come into America and they Americanize right away. Absolutely, 100%.
Yeah, myself.
And, well, there you go. And so, because like you came over here, you 12.
I came here when I was 18.
Oh shit. Okay. Wow. Okay. Way later. Yeah. So yeah, you just fit right in. It's no big deal. Other people, it's totally different. I think a big reason for that is language too.
Certainly,
like you speak English.
That is a part of it. But my point is, I don't think that like American culture is like is superior. There's plenty of issues that you have also.
Yes.
There's plenty of issues that you've also mentioned in American culture that makes it. There's plenty of issues with American governance right now that I don't think it like America is a superior culture at all. I don't think that there is any reason to have these kinds of conversations. What?
I totally agree with you about that. And I think that the evidence that it's a superior and great culture is the fact that we can talk about those things openly without any fear of negative repercussions.
Well,
I think it is. I do. And think about how many countries do not enjoy the privilege that we have right now.
Yeah,
And
it's
that
because
is why I think that our
they're
culture is
they're constantly, if we're talking about like countries in the global south, that is directly a consequence of being under constant domination. That's the whole point.
Oh, I mean, come on. We both know that there's
No,
plenty of
that is
countries that are not
100%.
under. Well, what about China? What about Russia? Right?
No,
I mean,
that's a great that okay, you just brought up a
go
great
ahead.
example. You
Yeah.
brought up a great example, okay? America, and you will see this, we're starting to experience this right now, but you will probably start seeing this a little bit more. Has not had the bountiful and fully liberated attitude towards our First Amendment throughout even American history. And that is going to come back right now. The only reason why America gets to be the way it is because it was the domineering force on the planet for a very long time without any sort of real threat. During the Cold War era, we had the McCarthy trials. Being a communist is still technically illegal in the books, but no one really applies it.
Is that true? I've never heard that.
Yeah. The
I'll take your word
Espionage
for
Act
it.
was
That sounds insane.
the Espionage Act was directly designed during World War II in an effort to stop people from speaking out against the war efforts. Like, so
Sure.
even throughout American history during the Cold War, and even before that during World War II and even World War I, there were plenty of instances where naysayers were actually jailed. Something that seems insane to contend with now in current American existence, right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Horrible.
And yet, historically speaking, revolutionary figures have not only been imprisoned, but also been assassinated by the American state, specifically black revolutionary figures in our history. And that was because...
Or attempted to assassinate, like with Martin Luther King.
Yeah. So, he was assassinated.
Was it? Yeah, but like, was that? But like, what I'm saying is, like, it was not really determined that it was from the U.S. But the U.S. had it a bit. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
The point is, you do that when you are afraid, when you don't have like weak governments and governments that are worried about complete control, engage in these like authoritarian acts. And yes, America, I suspect, especially with like China growing in power on the global stage, engaging in a lot of soft power initiatives, especially, is causing American society and American governance to become once again as restrictive as it once was during the Cold War. And I think that we will see a very different understanding of the First Amendment. And I can give you a current understanding of the direct violation of the First Amendment and free speech as we know it and understand it.
Give me an example.
BDS laws, boycott, divestment, and sanctions against the state of Israel. BDS laws, or BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions, was a movement that was created against apartheid South Africa. It was to apply social pressure by taking advantage of this wonderful First Amendment that we have here to directly demand that the American government and American corporations boycott the state of South Africa. Now, Israel was a big ally to South Africa at the time, and they learned from the lessons of South Africa, as the BDS movement was very successful in creating a shit ton of pressure and making South Africa as an apartheid state into a pariah state. And what happened at the end of the day, South Africans also recognized that they were becoming a pariah state and could not continue their normal existence with like their Western collaborators and whatnot. And inevitably, the apartheid ended. Israel learned that lesson and decided to lobby the American government and lobby American Congress and write direct laws that are in contravention with the First Amendment. In 32 states right now in the United States of America, including the state that you're currently in, if you want to be a public school teacher, you have to sign a piece of paper, at least now. I don't know if you have any family members that are school teachers. You have to sign a piece of paper that says you will never participate in boycotting or demanding sanctions or demanding divestment from the state of Israel.
Holy fuck, are you kidding me?
Yes.
Oh my God. What a joke. I never heard that.
So
that's so fucking stupid.
So that paired up with the new...
I mean, like, no, here's the thing, right? That's fucking terrible. You're totally right.
Yeah.
That's all, like, I mean, because, yeah, this is bad.
Okay.
I don't know how this happens.
I mean, that happened over many, many years of people being like, well, the Palestinians kind of deserve it because Israel's our great ally and it's the only moral democracy in the fucking region. And it's the only democracy in the region. It happened with a shit ton of efforts to propagandize Israel's position as what it was not, which it was directly at odds of. And most people are completely and utterly unfamiliar. And any kind of person that was criticizing it, like a person like myself, was immediately branded an anti-Semite for calling into question this foreign nation and their direct lobbying efforts to undermine American First Amendment laws.
You got labeled as the anti-Semite of the day, didn't you?
Of the week from sofantisemitism.org. Yes.
Yeah.
So
like, and I do want to make sure that like it's very much established that like in the same way that criticizing any sort of like Zionism or Israel or whatever is not anti-Semitism. It absolutely is not. I don't think criticizing the outcomes of certain cultures is any form of racism. I don't think so either.
No, but I don't criticize, but I'm not talking about like Jewish culture. Do you see what I'm saying? When I talk about Israel, I'm talking about the direct actions of the Israeli state as it stands.
Right.
It's direct actions that are the maintenance of an apartheid state. I'm talking about settler colonialism. I'm not talking about like an intractable quality of like Jewish people that makes them immoral or inferior to anybody else. I don't believe that.
I think that it of course. I think it really like you can't. If you look at people through like a I guess like I don't know like really what the word is for it, like basically just like a statistic. I think that looking at people through statistics is fundamentally dehumanizing. I think that you're right. Of course it is. It's by definition dehumanizing. But I think that you can look at the actions of the people that are in charge of those countries and say that those actions are not actions that you support.
Yeah.
In the same way that you do.
But I also rate on a curve. I also rate on a curve in terms of like what is immediately in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
You know?
I understand. I don't like the tier list idea. I see your point of view.
But it's not a tier list. It's just like well, in terms of not being a tier list, there are certain things that are there are certain things that go beyond, and I think everyone kind of intrinsically understands this. Like there are certain things that go beyond the tier list, right? Like there is no like I don't like I consider the Holocaust and the genocide that the Nazi government engaged in to be morally repugnant, like one of the worst things that has ever happened historically. And I consider chattel slavery in that same vein, and the maintenance of it. Not good. Yeah. And so I don't think or care about like the way that German Jews operated or their understanding of like homosexuality at the time. That bears no basis. Just like I don't care about the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising like being violent. I think that it was the moral and righteous thing to do. The Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was the correct thing to do at the time. And that's because I look at the far greater evil and the far greater violence in that circumstance, and I consider it to be unproductive to think about like what people did in resisting towards that violence, because as long as it never meets the standard of the dominating force, like ultimately it doesn't matter. I'm not going to hypothesize like what German Jews would have done if they had the same military power that Germany did. Would they have dominated like the Volkish German society in the same way that like Nazi Germany dominated the Jews? No, I don't think so. And I don't, there is no evidence that they would do such a thing. And that's my perspective on the matter.
Well, I think
the same thing, and that's how I feel about the Palestinians.
I understand that. Well, I mean, I feel like a lot of Palestinians, I mean, I've seen videos of Palestinians celebrating 9/11, right? I mean, I mean,
Palestinians.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure really whether this is entirely true with all of them, and also like,
but like I don't even. Do you fault them for celebrating like? I mean, there were Palestinians that were celebrating like Iran attacking Israel, for example. Iran
Of
did a
course.
retaliation strike against Israel, and they said that they were going to hit two air bases, and they were going to hit the Mossad headquarters directly
Do
inside of Tel Aviv.
do I fault somebody, not Palestinians, let's just say anybody, for celebrating the deaths of a lot of people that are innocent? Yes, I think it's bad.
Do you think
It is
that?
bad.
Do you think that if Jews in concentration camps were celebrating the bombing of Dresden, would you fault them in a similar vein?
I would say that it was bad. Yeah, it would.
Jews
Obviously,
in concentration camps, if they were to see like bombs falling over Dresden and they were like, "Wow, this is sick! Like we're gonna get liberated," I think like things are changing. I would not fault them. I think that they have every right to do so.
So I think that a lot of things you can understand why somebody is doing something.
And but for the record,
And
I also think like Dresden was like the bombing of Dresden, for example, was considered to not be appropriate in terms of like all the civilian infrastructure and civilian targets that were destroyed, which is why we applied new rules of war after World War II. But even then, in that very moment, I would never in a million years turn around and be like, man, these Jews like these Jews in Dachau are sure getting a little too excited about the bombing of Dresden. Like I would not say that. I don't think you would either.
I don't think that it's really something that like you would focus on a lot, but I think that it's easy to acknowledge killing innocent people isn't a good thing. And of course it can be understandable and things can have an explanation, but the explanation isn't necessarily a justification, if that makes sense. So like I see your point of view and about how like there's a certain degree of this where it's like understandable. And I agree with you that it is understandable. But I think that understandable bad behavior in a lot of cases is still in fact bad behavior. And I don't really think that like it's impossible to know what somebody else would do in a circumstance that they're not part of. But what I do know is that when I see a group of people that are celebrating a bunch of innocent people getting killed, then I think that that group of people is doing something that's wrong. And I think that it's universally wrong. And I understand that from their point of view, and I can easily put myself in their shoes, and I can see the reason why they think that.
So
Absolutely,
you'd be the one teenager in Gaza being like, hold on, guys. Let's not celebrate the Iranian retaliation against this country that is like literally eviscerated my family. Like,
you know what
you'd be like, no, this is sick.
I would be cheering it on. I would say yes. Fuck
Okay,
yes.
I'm glad that you agree. Okay.
I wouldn't be sitting on a soapbox saying that I'm the good guy. I would be like,
No,
yeah,
I still think
you get what you fucking deserve. That's
they're
what I
not
would
the
say.
good guys in this situation. They're the victims, and that's the point. Like, I'm not going to fault the victims of a genocide for experiencing a little bit of joy in that moment. And
I get that, but sometimes victims can create more victims.
Well, historically, so that's a good example. That's a good point that you made. This is something that every single like world-changing event. This is a genuine fear that a lot of people have exhibited in the aftermath of the abolition of slavery in the Reconstruction era. Okay, there was a lot of fear from the whites in the South that newly freed slaves were going to come and like dominate them and enslave them. That of course didn't happen, but they very quickly sought to restore the racial pecking order, and they were able to do so. And the violence actually even in the aftermath of like liberation of a people that were dominated, the violence usually still comes from people that don't want that sort of change. So it's not necessarily that it wasn't that like black people were like dominating white people and like enslaving them or anything or like killing them. It was more so white people that were fearful that they would do such a thing, that or at least use that unjustifiable fear as a way to continue dominating black people. That's how we came up with Jim Crow laws and segregation and the like. And that's where the Klan was invented.
We've been very creative with racism.
What?
Oh, I know. We've been very creative with racism.
Yeah. So
the 3/5 compromise.
But you have to remember. But you have to remember once again, it was never. But black people did not actually end up dominating white people. Is my point, and not because they weren't given the opportunity. There was no interest or need. The idea that the idea that like colonial victims will do the very same if given the opportunity is false. It has never happened throughout history, and that's my point. That usually is the domineering principle from those who are at least like watching from the sidelines, or those who are directly a part of the dominating group, like the colonial entity. But that's usually not how it goes. That's never how it goes.
Right? So if Palestine had the ability to, do you think Israel would exist?
That's a great question. One that people ask me all the time. If Palestine, okay, if historic Palestine existed, right, in the same way as like a nuclear militant force, Israel as an apartheid regime would not exist. Israel would have never been able to dominate and occupy Palestinian villages and wipe out Palestinians, and that there is no, like, the dynamic would be so different that
where would they
the
go?
dynamic would be so different that, like, the notion that Palestinians would wipe out Israel is silly. Like, it's not. There would be no need for the Palestinians to wipe out Israeli citizens, because that need is born out of being removed from their homes, their ancestral homelands, and being destroyed. If, for example, in the 20s, when the settler colonial initiative started after the Balfour Declaration, if this was not done as a dominating force in a British Empire at the time, was not purposely and willingly shipping Jewish people into the region and giving them areas that they had declared that was basically created in the same way that like America was created, giving them areas of land specifically. And instead, if Jewish people were like voluntarily migrating into the region, then it would resemble American society. It would be a diverse society of Jews and Muslims and Christians living side by side. But that is a complete alternative history in this situation, so I don't even know how that would work.
Massively. Yeah, it's total alternative. Well, I don't know whether that would happen.
I could point to like Ottoman rule in the region, because Jews did live in the region under Ottoman occupation, and they were cohabitating the space without much struggle or fight at all, as a matter of fact.
I think that you're right about that. I do. If I think about it myself, and I feel like back then, definitely a better cultural viewpoint on that. I think so. I don't know what would happen if Israel wasn't able to defend itself. Would they continue to exist? Right? It's very hard to say.
No, but
because we're making predictions.
In terms of the resistance, right? In terms of resistance, everyone always says like, "Oh, Palestinians are inherently anti-Semitic." Joe Biden himself said.
No,
Joe Biden himself said. Palestinians demonstrate an ancient form of anti-Semitism, and that's why they are resisting against Israel. This is not the case.
Right.
Many of Palestinian resistance leaders throughout history, including ones that are religious fundamentalists, including ones that are secular, including ones that are very including ones that are Christian, including ones that are Marxist, socialist, they've always said that this has nothing to do with Judaism or Jews in general. If Israel was a Christian state, or if Israel was a Muslim state, and they said that they were doing, then they would, hate. Then they would hate Israel as a Muslim state. It has nothing to do. It bears no basis. And Palestinian resistance throughout time.
You're right about that.
And Palestinian resistance throughout time has hardened and has become more violent as Israel has become more violent towards Palestinians, because the standard is always set by the occupying power.